So I'd like to call this special city council meeting of November 30th, 2020 to order. This is our second budget meeting and we'll be discussing in this meeting the general government budget. Madam Clerk, could you please call the roll?
Zingy.
Here.
Bergeron. Bergeron. We'll come back to him. Kiefer.
Here.
Flora.
Here.
Gas.
Here.
Bradbury.
Here.
Bergeron.
Chime in. I know he was on earlier.
He's here. Says he just joined. So we're good.
All right.
Thank you.
You didn't call me.
Gage. What happened to Gage?
I'm going. I'm going to go now.
No.
I'm here.
Sorry about that.
Sam, you here?
I am. I just had
All
a
right.
computer foo-foo. I'm back.
All right. Thank you. Would you please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance
Allegiance
to the
to the
flag
flag
of the United
of the United
States of America,
to
to the
the
republic,
republic for
which
which it
stands,
stands,
one nation,
nation,
under God, indivisible,
indivisible,
liberty
with
and
liberty
justice
and
for all.
justice for all.
Thank you. The Ketchikan City Council would like to respectfully acknowledge the traditional first people of this land in Ketchikan, Tongass Tlingit people. With that brings us to communications, and under communications, I would like to invite Abner to give us a little bit of update where we are in regards to the COVID and our risk levels and stuff. So Abner, if you would please.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and Council. Abner Hogue, Incident Commander for the EOC. Just a brief update tonight for you on the status of our response to COVID here in Ketchikan. We did announce a change in our risk level today to level 2 moderate. Our cases have continued to trend down after the outbreak that we experienced in mid to late October and into early November. Our positivity rate is down to right around 1.25%. It'll fluctuate a little bit from day to day depending on how many tests are done, but we're solidly in that level 2 range. We have 7 cases in the past 7 days, I believe is the number that we're at as of this afternoon. We did report 1 new case at the end of business today. We did have since then had 1 more case come in, but that'll be reported out tomorrow. But overall, the community is doing a really good job of responding. They reacted well to the requests that were made of them. And as a result, you see where we're at today.
Thank you for that, Abner. Does anybody have any questions for Abner at this point? Hearing and seeing none, that brings us down to persons to be heard. Madam Clerk, do we have anybody to speak to the council tonight?
None, Your Honor.
Thank you very much. That brings us down to unfinished business, and that is resolution number 202796, adopting the budget for the year of 2021, which was deferred from our previous meeting. So at this time, we'll put that back on the table for discussion. But prior to getting into that discussion, if I could, Carl, could you have us maybe go through the budget updates 3 through 6, just for an update and information?
I can do that, Mr. Mayor. Budget update number 3 were 3 questions that Councilmember Bradbury put to the Finance Director. The first one was how much would the city save if all employees under the general fund took 15% pay cut? And that would result in approximately $1.6 million in savings. If you add benefits to that, it would rise to about 2.132 million. It would fluctuate depending on whether the council wanted to include its members, the mayor, and the city council appointed employees. The second question posed was a question relative to the number of vehicles operated by general government, in particular those in the general fund. The answer to that question was there are approximately 112 in the general government fleet, 80 of which have been assigned to the general fund. And how many of those were essential? On the assumption that fire, police, public works, engineering, and public works streets were considered essential vehicles. 72 would be considered essential, or 90% of the general fund vehicles. And then there was a secondary part to that question relative to what was the cost of insurance for the non-essential vehicles assigned to the general fund, and that cost was approximately $1,543. The third inquiry had to do with contracted and purchased services for each department, and the finance department gave a breakdown of the major elements for each of the departments and divisions. I won't go through them, but if there are questions, I certainly can respond. Budget update number 4 was a inquiry that the council posed at your budget session of November 23rd. And essentially wanting to know what type of wage reduction would be required for general fund employees to cover the $1.75 million shortfall that we had earlier identified. The former finance director broke that down into 2 parts. First part, assuming that all positions, both filled and occupied, would be assigned a pay cut. A 12.4% wage reduction would be required to get you to that $1.75 million figure. If you were to eliminate the vacant positions from the equation and take that savings and apply it to the $1.75 million shortfall, you'd be looking at a 6.2% wage reduction for the remaining filled positions to get you about $950,000, which you would then add to the $800,000 in savings from not filling the 8 vacant positions, and that would give you that approximate amount of $1.75 million. Budget update number 5. The council asked us to identify various funds that you might be able to draw from relative to getting to that target figure of $1.75 million. The finance director identified a total of about $3.5 million that could be used, or that were identified as possible projected reserves. Of that amount, he identified $3.1 million that the council could tap into. He did exclude tapping into the transient tax fund and the community grant fund, and he gave you an explanation why. And if there are questions on that, I can respond to that. My recommendation relative to using any of these funds is that the council go through its review of the general government budget in its entirety, and then come back and make your last decisions about what funds may be necessary to draw from relative to meeting that target goal of $1.75 million. And then budget update number 6 is just a summary of the actions taken by the council at the last meeting in terms of the reductions you made in the various accounts. And if there are questions, I'd be glad to answer those as well. Briefly, that's it, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you for that, Carl. Does any council members have any comments or questions in regards to the updates that we have presently?
Your Honor.
go ahead.
I just have a question on budget update number 4. That shortfall of 949, 974, do we know what the rollback's going to be from this budget from 2020? Do we have any idea?
You're
Because
talking,
couldn't that be applied? Sorry.
if you're talking about appropriated reserves at the beginning of the year, we've incorporated that figure into the budget projections.
Carl, I think what she's talking about is
No.
the carryover from the previous year.
Right. Thank you, Bob.
So, a lot of times we'll talk about the debt that we may have, but it doesn't materialize because there's always a carryover from year to year and unspent revenue. And I guess her question is, as we, the proposed deficit that you listed or we have, is that considering the potential carryover?
No, not in the context of what Councilmember Zengi is asking about. What I would tell you is that over the last couple of years, that number has gotten progressively smaller, and our deficits are more realistic in terms of the numbers that we're projecting. I can get together with the finance director tomorrow and see what we might be able to generate as an estimate of that.
Thank you, Carl. Thank you, Judy. Anybody else have anything in regard to the updates that we have presently?
I had one clarification. I was a little confused on something.
Go ahead, Abby.
Number 4, budget update number 4. On the second option, it talks about the 10 vacant positions listed on amendment number 2 that we received last week. Am I just not understanding it correctly? Because I thought only 5 positions out of the 15 were vacant, and the other ones would require us to let people go.
There were 4 vacant in Public Works. There's 1 vacant position in the museum department, which would give you 5. We know that there will be 3 police retirements in the spring of next year. So we're considering those retirements leading to 3 additional vacant positions. And as a result of staff turnover in the fire department, we're now projecting 2 vacancies that will also be available if the council wants to factor those in. We assume from the direction at the meeting of the 30th that if we're holding anything vacant at this time, you wanted those included in the calculations.
Okay, thank you for clarification.
Thank you for that. Does anybody else have anything?
Could I ask
Go ahead,
another
Abby.
question?
No, that's all right. That's fine.
So I guess this would go to the chief, the fire department and police department. What is our overtime going to look like without filling these 5 positions?
So Abby, I think if we could, we can take those up under the department discussions when we're in those individual discussions. I
Okay,
think
that's
the
fine.
best way to handle. I think those are the best way to handle it. So anybody else?
Your Honor,
Yes.
I have a question for the manager. Again, budget update number 4. You refer to avoiding the risk of having retirement benefits reduced with the theoretical 6.2% payroll reduction. Would that actually be a reduction in retirement benefits, or would they just not continue to grow?
Councilmember Flora, what I was referring to and what the finance director was referring to, that if you have long tenured positions or employees, excuse me, that are close to retirement, if they are looking at a reduction in their salaries going into 2021, that may force them to consider retiring now as your final retirement benefits are based on your final 3-year average. And if you were to take a substantial hit, that would affect your final 3-year average, and it might force some employees to consider early retirement. I can tell you that when that issue was generated last spring in the early stages of the pandemic, I had 3 department heads indicate to me that if the council were going to implement a reduction in salary as a way to offset the revenue losses from having no cruise season, that they in all likelihood would retire rather than have to deal with that reduction and have it affect their retirement.
Your
Thank
Honor.
Go ahead.
Your Honor. Jan here.
Yeah.
Gage, just so we don't clarify.
Go ahead, Jen.
Yeah, I get that people don't want to have their retirements cut, and I understand that completely. However, I think at this point in the juncture, it's important to also consider there are people that work below us that don't want to lose their jobs completely. And in that case, they're going to lose not only their jobs, they're going to lose their homes and any other asset they've acquired. And sometimes we tend to forget that piece of the puzzle here. And those people are also revenue makers. They pay taxes, they pay property tax, and I honestly don't want to pick a fight, but I think it's really important that if we're all going to take on a piece of this responsibility, it needs to start at the top. And it may only go for 6 months. It may only go for, up till we can get back on our feet. But there are other businesses that have already done this. There are other places that have already done this. And then they brought back the salaries afterwards. So I'm just, if we're going to ignore this, I think it's just going to cause more rift amongst our, even our guys in the union. And I think this is where you have a conversation where we're going to take a little bit off our top, and we ask that maybe everybody not expect to get a raise. I mean, I think there's compromise here that can be made, and obviously the numbers speak louder than anything. And if good luck. If you're going to retire, fine. If you're going to go find a job somewhere else, fine. Obviously, this isn't your community. You're not willing to take one for the team. Everybody, we're all in this together, right? That's what I keep hearing. And that starts at the top. Thank you.
Thank you. Carl, I think just for clarification, if I remember right, the PERS retirement isn't necessarily the last 3, it's the 3 highest consecutive years.
Mr. Mayor, I would have to verify that. You could be right.
I think it's just the 3 consecutive years. So, but I appreciate that, and I think that this conversation that we're having in regards to employees and employment, retirements are all good. But I think what we need to do is we really need to work on this budget right now and get to the end of it, and then we have some final decisions that will really be evident at that particular point. And as we get numbers back in regards to carryovers and maybe some other adjustments we can do in the budget, we'll have a better idea of where we stand with that. So everybody has an opinion about this, and we are talking about employees and we're talking about other people. So I want to make sure that we're.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
this is Dave. Can you get a little closer to the microphone? I'm having trouble hearing you. Maybe it's just because I'm old, but I'm having trouble following you.
All right, Dave, how's this work? Good? All right, thank you. Yeah, I have my head down when I'm reading my book and stuff, so it's probably a little bit that way too. So anyway, I just want to make sure that we consider those individuals as we're having these discussions. So anyway, we left off at the fire department, and that's where we're going to pick up again today. So we'll start into that budget, and it's on J1. And we'll get that up on the screen here in a moment. Anyway, as we're waiting for that to come up, it's a summary page of the fire department. It shows the box matrix up there of operations, grant programs, capital improvement programs. As we move down through it, it gives you the division summaries, cost centers, and expenditures by categories. We go on to J2.
Your Honor, I have a question.
Yes, go right ahead.
I don't think it matters which page we're on when I ask this. This would be a question for the fire chief. So if we do not fill the 2 positions in the fire department that are slated for retirement as a cost-saving measure next year, I would like to know the impact, if any, to essential services, and perhaps at the same time, maybe Councilmember Bradbury's question about overtime could be addressed.
Carl, you're
Did you
Abner,
wanna
want
go
to take that?
I'm here, Mayor. This is Abner. So the question about if we don't fill those 2 positions, will that have an impact on the services that we offer? The answer to that is no. We did just add 3 positions in last year's budget, as you may recall. And that was mostly done to deal with the increased volume of passengers on the cruise vessels, which we haven't seen. So depending on the volume of cruise vessel traffic that comes back this coming year, that would be where that would have an impact. But we've been providing services even at full capacity with 3 less staff than we currently have. We have spent quite a bit on overtime in order to do that in some cases. I can tell you from this year's data, and I just looked at it really quickly, we're about 400 calls down this year, really roughly, from where we were this same time last year. So we definitely, not having cruise ships in here, we've seen a decrease in call volume. We've seen a little bit of an offsetting increase probably in call volume due to COVID that we've dealt with, but overall we're down about 400 calls. It's a really tough question to answer, not knowing what the next year is going to bring in terms of responses as to how well we'll be able to respond relative to overtime. A majority of our overtime costs in the fire department does come from people coming back in for second calls and to staff an ambulance while one is taking a medevac across the airport, for example. So they are response related, and it's really difficult to predict what that's going to look like.
Chief, thank you, and I apologize for looking away, but as you're speaking, I'm making some notes, so thank you very much.
Abner, in regards to like the callbacks and the ambulance transport, if it's ambulance service and stuff that we have going, those are a pass-through billing. Is that correct?
I missed the last part of what you said, Mayor Severson. Those are what?
Pass-through billings. They go back to the insurance or the person to pay for whatever the call is.
We do bill for transports of individuals to the hospital and individuals to the medevacs, and those revenues are accounted for in our budget.
Thank you. So that moves us on to J2.
Your
We're
Honor,
talking about, yes.
yeah, sorry to chime in, but I'm very happy to hear Chief Hoag's response to that. And it sounds like he and Chief White both are on the same page as far as the potential delaying of filling those positions for a year or whatever. So I just want to highlight that, and I guess I'll just say this while I'm speaking, that looking at this, I'm in favor of kind of a combination of the 2 presentations here, which is right now I'm in favor of not filling the vacant positions and then looking at, okay, how much of a cut is everybody gonna have to take? So I just wanted to put that out there that I'm kind of for the hybrid on this. So I'm happy to hear Chief Hoag's response to that. Thanks.
Thank you. Abby, did you have something?
Yeah, I just was looking at the overtime wage estimate for 2020, and it's at 291,000 and some change. I see it's slated for 2021, 116,000 and some change. I don't know if this is chief or the financial director, but if we do not fill those two positions, which is roughly, let me see, is roughly 140,000. Are we going to be spending more in overtime on let's say a year like 2020 next year? I mean, that's kind of, we're weighing dollars here. I'm just curious.
Unfortunately, that's going to be a really tough question to answer. We did spend quite a bit extra on overtime early on in this year due to COVID and due to some need to quarantine individuals that resulted in a lot of overtime. At one point, I think we were down to 5 or 6 staff that were working, and they were just working back to back in order to keep staff on duty. If we don't encounter that experience and we have all of our staff working as we would in a normal year, I think we're probably close. I would not be surprised if at $116,000 in overtime budget, if I had to come back to you near the end of the year and move some of my money around in order to cover those expenses. But I really can't provide a much better answer than that, unfortunately.
Thank you, Abner. And as we're on J2 and we're looking at these funding sources, public safety is one of those items that CARES Act money can help fund. And I can't help but think, as you just spoke, in regards to some of the added overtime and capacity issues that we have, that we probably didn't ask enough of this fund in regard to offsetting the actual costs as related to your division. So I guess going forward, if there's another round of CARES Act money, can you see where we can maybe cover some of these anticipated costs that we have going forward? Would that be a fair assumption?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I believe that's a fair assumption that the authorization under CARES Act would have allowed us to exempt all of our salaries and benefits basically since the pandemic started, assuming that the council deemed those costs necessary to respond to COVID, and a large portion of them were. So based on that, yes, I think your assumption is correct.
Thank you. Any other questions on J2, which is the funding source of the page there, and full-time equivalent personnel? Hearing none, we're going to go to J3. That's the operations 1210, 110. Shows the matrix of the breakdown of the department by shifts. Talks about the different classifications that we have in there. Is there any questions on that? Hearing none, we'll move on to J4. Talks about the accomplishments in 2020. So some of the numbers in regards to transports. As Abner had indicated, that we are down a little bit due to the lack of a cruising season. Any questions for J4? We'll move on to J5. And again, that's more of the 1210, 110 summary. We have a division summary. We'll go through the budget, expenditures, funding sources, and full-time equivalent personnel. Are there any questions in regards to that? Hearing seeing none, we're going to move on to J6. That's operations again. It shows a pie chart with the expenditures and what type by type. We also have the operating budget changes for 2021. As you can see, there was some significant cuts there in regards to different funds or account sources. Again, we went down to the division operating and budget details. That goes by personnel service and benefits. Supplies are on J7. And we have contract purchase services also on J7. And Abner, is in your attempt to cut the travel and training, are we just doing the training that keeps our certifications current? Is that what we're looking at?
Correct. Only very minimal travel would be allowed, and it would have to be essential. We did our best to attempt to estimate what those costs would be and cut everything else.
Thank you, Abner. Is there anything for J7? If not, we'll move on to J8. That looks at operating expenditures and then gets into the narrative sections. Any questions, concerns there? J9 is more of the narratives. J10, another set of narratives, talks about what the different appropriation classifications are and why they're there. J11 is a continuation of that. Moves us into J12, and this is the operating capital budget for the grants program, 1210-192. Gives a mission statement, goals, accomplishments, and operating changes. Any questions regarding the J12? If not, that brings us to J13, which is division operating budget, personnel service benefits, supplies, contract purchases, and minor capital outlay. Any questions on J13? Moves us on into J14, where we look at the grant programs. In summary of the funding sources, they're federal, state, and local match programs there. And these have dried up over time. There used to be a lot more of these grants out there, but there's not so much at this particular point in time. Then it moves into the narratives. Continues on with narratives on J15. Is there any questions in regards to any of that? And remember, council members, anytime you want to go back to any of these pages, please just pipe up and we'll go back with the clarification. J16, we're again into the major capital outlays and in the capital improvement projects. Please remember, we do have a whole section on that where we can probably get into a deeper discussion on that. If there's something that you have question of at this particular point in time, you can bring that forward too. You do have an opportunity under the capital or CIP program to look at that. We're on J16.
Your Honor, I have a few.
Yes. Go ahead.
Obviously, I asked all the other departments, but 790.15 and 790.26. I want to know do we need the $1,000 for furniture and fixtures? And then on the computers and printers, I know we need $1,500 for 2 computers that need to be replaced, but what do we need the rest of the money for?
Sorry, you'd think I hadn't been working a computer very long, Councilmember Bradbury. The answer to your question is the remaining balance under the computers is for things like uninterrupted power supplies. I think we have $600, enough for 3 power supplies in there. Those back up our computers, they back up our radio systems, they back up several different critical devices in the fire department, and we usually end up replacing a couple of those a year. So that's what the difference is there, other than the computers, the PCs. And I did talk with IT today and asked them about how critical our need is for those PC replacement funds. And Curtis reminded me that we did cut that by 50% from what we had originally anticipated. We would hate to get too far behind on the upgrading at least some of our technology. We spend quite a bit of time using PCs to review plans, to write our reports and that sort of thing as well. So similar to other departments, we probably should continue with the PC replacement. On the furniture and fixtures, we can cut that.
Thank you.
Okay, Abner, anybody else? J13. And J14 was the continued on with the grant programs, and then J16 again with the capital. Anything for fire at this particular point in time, understanding that we can always come back as we move through the budget and see other things. So Abner, I don't know how much of your usage is electrical related in your services and stuff. Was there any consideration in regards to the lack of a diesel surcharge? I know that we had a pretty tough season last year where that diesel surcharge seemed to hang on forever, and I don't know how it affected individual departments. I think that if you were one of those departments with electrical heat, it probably cost you more.
So thanks, Mayor Severson. I actually, Assistant Chief Scott Brainerd did much of the work for the budget this year, and he did a really good job. What I can tell you is I don't have the answer to that, so I'm going to defer to him and see if he happens to know the answer to that question.
I would actually have to look up that diesel surcharge and do some research on it, but I can say that while we were running the on the diesel power at Bailey, we're running our own boilers at Fire Station 1 to cut down the cost and the load for the city. So it would be, we were buying the diesel straight.
Thank you, Scott. I just know that there are some departments that do have electrical heat sources and may not have a dual heat source. So I think that's a consideration, because if I remember right, it was fairly substantial for a long period of time. I think we actually had to do some supplemental to cover a few of those. Thank you. Thank you for that. So if we leave fire and go to K1, which is the police department, we have the summary page before us. Operations, E911, and parking enforcement. We have the division cost centers and programs and the expenditures by category. Any questions on K1?
Your Honor,
Yes, go right ahead.
I'd like to ask the police chief the same question that I asked the fire chief. If the positions that are slated to go vacant via retirement occur, would there be any interruption to the level of police service?
Mr. Flora, yeah, I looked at the numbers and I believe that we will be able to accomplish everything we need to with that staffing level. It does take us back a little bit, but it should not be a problem going forward from there.
Thank you, Chief.
Mm-hmm.
I think we all have to, though, be mindful of the fact that if we have injuries or sicknesses in any one of these departments and they're at a minimum workforce, that will have an impact, and they'll have to try to cover those systems. So thank you for their working with us in regard to those staffing numbers. Moves us on to K2. Again, that's some of the funding source. Joe, and I think the same thing is true as we talked with Chief Hogue about, is that there's probably some CARES Act money that could be utilized here, offsetting some of the costs that you had.
I believe so, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. And I'm hoping there will be another round of that coming, and we'll probably take a look at that and see if there's anything, because I know public safety is one of those areas where you can utilize it. Anything else on K2?
I had a quick question.
Yes, go ahead, Emily.
Yeah, did we ever find out about the health insurance we switched over? How that was working for you guys?
Councilmember Gage, is my understanding the represented employees here really enjoy that health insurance. They are quite pleased with it. That's all I know for sure.
Okay.
It appears to be a cost savings, and I think that they're happy with the plan that they have with that.
Thank you. Moves us on to K3, which is the mission statement. It also breaks down the department, shows where the manpower is being utilized. We talk about the goals and the accomplishments as we move through that. K4 is the division summary. We're down to the expenditures by category, the funding sources that we have in full-time equivalent personnel, shows how many we have and what the total cost is for that position. We go on to K5, which are some of the operating budget changes for 2021. And as we can see, some of that stuff is out of our control when you talk about the interdepartmental charges for insurance, where the increase has been about $12,000. And it's due to poor claim experience. It's not necessarily poor claim experience with catch cans, that's overall in the industry, law enforcement. So I think some of this we might get caught up a little bit in what's going on. So that would be my assumption. I guess.
Question, Your Honor.
Yes.
If 3 positions are not filled, is there any potential savings in the uniform allowance?
Would that be the 509.10?
Yes, sir. 50901. Yes, sir.
I believe it should be somewhat of a savings, but I'm not, yeah, maybe it would take it down a little bit. I believe that money is also part of the uniform allowance that we have, so it's a charge we make to the city, but then it's deducted out of their uniform allowance on their paycheck. So I believe that might be going hand in hand with that.
Oh, okay. Thanks, Chief. I know we're snatching crumbs here somewhat, but we just got to look everywhere we can.
No, I get it. Thank you for the question.
Your Honor.
Yes, go right ahead.
Yeah. Chief White, I was looking at 50907 moving expenses. If we don't fill those 3 positions, does that mean that 15,000 would go away, or would that be set aside for something else?
No, right now I'm trying to fill 2 vacant positions going into the first of the year. I have 1 opening and I have another resignation that just happened. Those positions will be advertised and a process will be run. And so we won't be able to fill those till next year. If there's a chance that we're getting out of state employees or out of town employees coming in, I would like to have a little bit of moving money to get them here. It's quite expensive to get to Ketchikan either in state or out of state. So with the 2 that we're trying to fill now going into the first of the year, I think it's kind of critical to still have that in the budget.
Totally understand. I'm sorry for the resignation as well. Makes it difficult.
Yes, thank you.
Your Honor.
Go right ahead.
On that note, question for Chief White. That just brings up another thought. Is there any sort of a policy or a tendency to look to hire local, being that $15,000 obviously would just be one, well, we'd like to hire local, but that could be kind of another incentive. Is that something you guys factor in?
Absolutely. We try to hire local as often as possible. Sometimes we just don't get the local applicants. One of the things we have to weigh out in the long run also is if we take, there's a big cost difference between hiring a entry-level officer versus a lateral officer from another department. So we might spend a little more in moving expenses getting them up here, but we save about $10,000 in academy fees if we have a trained officer from other department. If we hire somebody that has no training whatsoever, that employee is going to take us about a year to get them up and running and trained and on the street. Versus if we hire a lateral, we're looking at 3 to 4 months of in-house training and then a short 2-week academy, which, like I said, saves us about $10,000 from academy fees. So it's a double-edged sword there. We do try to hire local as often as possible, They usually, they turn out to be good employees for us, but it just depends on where we get the applications from.
Thank you, Chief.
Yep.
All right, anything else on K5 where we moved into division operating budget details? Hearing none, we move on to K6, some more operating details, contract purchase services, minor capital outlay, and interdepartmental charges. After that, we move into narratives.
Your Honor.
Yes, go right ahead.
I was just wanting a little bit more explanation on 63504. I see that there is a $14,000 increase, and I just wanted to be sure I knew what that was.
Yeah, I believe that is going to be an increase for cloud storage for our TASER, our camera system. We have an interview room and the body worn cameras, and I believe that's going to be licensing and cloud storage for that program.
Okay, thank you. And then, of course, the dreaded 79015 and 79026. I'm more concerned about 79026 because it says we need to replace 2 computers, which, as we see, the fire department's roughly, $1,500, $2,000, and then that leaves $4,000 for printer. So, I mean, is it really that much funds really necessary? I see that it went up $1,500. I'm just curious.
I think we had a couple laser printers programmed out for that. I'm not sure if that's still a necessity or not. I'll have to double check on that. That number, yeah, I honestly don't know which 2 computers are up for rotation in the department. We have 2 sets of computers. We have the desk computers for most of the office employees for better part, and then we have laptops, tough books for the patrol officers, and those aren't scheduled into this. That's a program that was half funded by the state, and it's now dried up. So we're trying to keep that program going best we can with rebuilding those as they come up. Fixtures and furnitures. Yeah, we could probably get away with that. One of the downsides to this department is it's a 24/7 department, so I've got officers sitting in and out of chairs nonstop, day in, day out. And so we do need to make sure that when something breaks, we need to be able to get it replaced. If we want to cut that budget or take it away, we can address it as it comes up throughout the year.
Thank you. K6 going once, twice, 3 times. We'll move on to K7. More parts of the narrative. K8 continuation of narratives, and K9 are narratives. Brings us into K10, which is the E909 Central Communications Division, 1220.22 or 220. Shows a breakdown of that, talks about the core accomplishments, and looks at the division summary and how that works. And then we move over, of course, to the funding source. Yes.
I have a question for the manager, please.
Yes, go right ahead.
Carl, what became, wasn't there supposed to be some sort of true up or more balanced participation from the budget, or excuse me, the borough, when it came to the E911 services? What became of that?
Councilmember Flora, those discussions were suspended due to the COVID-19 pandemic. I have instructed my staff to make overtures to the borough to resume those discussions in the near future. I don't think you'll see resolution relative to your consideration of the 2021 budget. I think this will probably carry over into next year before we have a consensus.
Understood. Could you remind us again, please, though, what the potential savings to the city is, please? If something were to, be formalized?
It's a wide range depending on how you want to look at it. Obviously, if you want to build in both your capital and operational costs based on a consideration that it's not the volume of calls, it's the system being available to respond to those calls, it could be a substantial sum of money. The borough traditionally has not looked at it that way, that they want to take an approach that really they should pay by the number of calls, which is much smaller in North and South Tongass than it is in the city of Ketchikan, despite the fact that they're using the same dispatchers and the same dispatch equipment. So we haven't been able to bridge that gap yet. We're looking at a couple of variations, and we'll report back to you as soon as we have something to discuss.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Carl. So that brings us on over to that K11, which shows the funding source and the 2021 budget and where some of those monies come from. And Ketchikan Gateway Borough listed there. And then, of course, it goes on to show the full-time equivalent personnel. And I think just for the viewing public, we look down through that budget because it shows that that particular item costs us $1.3 million to operate. And then, of course, it shows the expenditures by type. Talks about the budget changes in 2021, and remember that these budget changes are only listed if they're greater than 5% or 5,000, as discussed below. So it doesn't show all the changes, just those that are of that nature. Moves us on to K-12, division operating budget details. Again, we're in the operating expenditures, supplies, contract purchase services, minor capital, and departmental charges. Are there any questions about K-12? And again, it shows that overall that's about a 3.7% decrease in the budget. Brings us to K-13, which is the narrative for those operating expenditure categories. K-14 is a continuation of that. Brings us on to K-15, parking enforcement. Bill 2022-1 shows the matrix employment has the goals and accomplishments. Brings us on to K-16. So, Joe, how has the pandemic and the lack of the cruise industry affected this particular department?
Well, it definitely, I can see an uptick in some of the calls, some domestic violence type stuff. It has, it's affected us in some ways. Our overtime budget seems to be, we're going slower through it. And I think that may be reflecting on some of the court activities, how they've been shut down and some of our court time has not been there. But as far as I can see a general uptick in maybe alcohol related stuff and domestic violence. And I think that going into this winter, I think it's going to possibly increase with seasonal depression and economic crisis and pandemic continuing. So I'm expecting that our calls for service are gonna keep going in that upward direction.
Thank you, Joe. And in parking enforcement, I see that in the past, the fines and forfeitures have paid a substantial part in the budget funding, and I see now that we're down about 30 grand, or 30%, and we're going to have to rely more heavily, I guess, upon tax support to do that. At what point does the cost benefit in that we are in? I think without a cruise industry, we're working more on time lots and things like that. Do we have enough to keep this person busy, or is there other duties on the time?
I'm sorry, Mr. Mayor, that maybe I missed the original question. Was it asking how the pandemic has affected parking enforcement?
Yeah, that's part of it. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch the whole question.
No, that was all good information. Thank you,
I
Joe.
apologize. Yeah, we definitely, during the pandemic, we've slowed down on the time parking enforcement for sure. All parking complaints that come into the station, usually are handled by patrol officers. So the goal really for parking enforcement is to keep the timed lots turning over, so that they're available to people to use. And it's without the tourist season this year, it was kind of a light season down there for that.
And I guess in the past, Carl, we'll probably speak about this at the council meeting. We have suspended parking restrictions in the downtown through the holiday season. Is that correct?
We normally do that for a couple of weeks during the holiday season, Mr. Mayor. When we went to level 3, we again suspended parking enforcement because City Hall was not open for people who wanted to buy permits. So it didn't seem right that we were going to enforce if people didn't have the ability to buy those permits. I think it's a function of what the council wants to estimate what we're going to have next season as a cruise ship season. If it's anything like we experienced in 2020, the need for parking enforcement is probably going to be less justifiable. There's no question during the summer seasons when it's a normal season, there's a need for that level of parking enforcement, not only in the lots downtown, but also the lots out on Tongass relative to the use of the harbors. So between the two, there's a need. It's not something you can assign to the patrol division. Officers are not going to be able to do their normal range of duties and then pick up parking enforcement responsibilities if the council were to do away with the parking enforcement division until there's a normal return to cruise season. It can't be done by the patrol division. I don't know if Joe wants to speak to that.
Yeah, thank you, Carl. I think that would be very cumbersome, and with the nature of just the patrol staff and the calls that we get, it would be nearly impossible for them to try to do timed parking enforcement and respond to calls as they come up, and to be a visible deterrent and proactive. I don't see how it all meshes together. I don't see it. Sorry.
Yeah, I think the only consideration there you would have is whether or not we're suspending the time parking until such time as we had passengers and seasons back as warranted. That's a whole other discussion. Maybe not at this point. Thank you. Brings us on to K17, Division Operating Summary, Parking Enforcement. K18 is the narratives for some of that. K19 is the grants programs. We talk about the mission statement, the goal, accomplishments. We look at operating expenditures through the grant program and what some of those are. Continuing on with the cost summary statement, cost centers, funding sources, operating changes. There weren't any significant changes in this in 2020. We look at the cost centers again. Then we move on to K21, which is the major capital expenditures, and then the capital improvement projects. And again, we get a shot at the capital improvement projects at the end of the general government operation budget for each one of those individually. Any questions or comments?
Your Honor.
Yeah.
I know it was discussed at the last meeting about the the system for how often we replace police vehicles. And I don't mean to be condescending in any way, but $65,000 for replacing a new police vehicle, is that something that could, I mean, the vehicle that's being replaced, is it something that's in dire straits to be done? Is that something we could push back a year due to the unprecedented budget situation? That's my question.
So Joe, how attached are you to this vehicle?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Gass, thank you. Yeah, we didn't get any cars in this year, 2020. We were asking for one in 21. If we went without it this year, we might have to play catch up down the road when things are more flush. But I don't think it would impact our ability to provide service in the upcoming year if we were to push that out a little bit.
Thank you, Joe. We'll consider that when we get into the CIPs. Thank you, Riley.
Thank you.
Anything on K-12? Hearing, seeing none, we'll move out of the police into the public health. So on L1, we have a summary for public health. The Public Health Center, healthcare operations, capital improvement programs. This is shows the summaries there on L1, expenditures by categories and funding sources. Are there any questions in regard to L1? Moves us to L2, talk about the mission statement, the goals, accomplishments. L3 is a continuation of the accomplishments. And then division summaries start on L3 with the expenditures by categories and the funding sources. The two funding sources are either general fund or tactical. The tactical. Is there anything on L3? Moves us on to L4. There's no significant changes in 20 to 21. It shows the expenditures by categories in a pie chart. We talk about it, operating expenditures for division operations, the supplies, contract purchase, minor capital outlays. Is there any questions on those items?
Your Honor.
Yes, go right ahead.
So just to clarify, who does this public health operations? Am I missing? Like, I don't see, the reason I ask is because the minor capital outlay is talking about machinery, equipment, furniture, and fixtures. I'm just trying to figure out who does this pertain to, or who would this go to for this division or this area?
Carl?
The Public Health Center is operated by the state. Councilmember Bradbury, this has been a long-standing arrangement that the city has had with the state since I've been in Ketchikan. It preceded my arrival. I can get you a copy. I can try to get you the documentation if you want to see that led to the arrangement that's currently in practice today.
Yeah, I would like to see it, but then also thank you for explaining that. I was a little.
Did you have something? All right, L1 or L4, nothing there. L5 is the narratives for that. Moves us on to L6, which is the healthcare operation 132110. Again, expenditures by category and funding source. We look at the budget changes. There's an increase of 75,000 or about 150% to reflect the ongoing litigation with contractor on the hospital expansion project. We've all heard about that in the past and it continues. Hopefully it's going to come to an end at some point here, but we have professional legal advice as we go through this in regard to building and building envelope. L7. Anything in L7? L8, major capital outlays, and then some capital improvement projects. In that, we have the KMC expansion, domestic violence shelter, and the hospital in Europe. We'll discuss in the CIP. Anything in public health? Anything else? Hearing and seeing none, we move on to the library. On page M1, we have a summary. Talks about the cost centers for programs, expenditures by category, and funding sources. Carl, in regards to the funding sources, one there is the charge for services for the Ketchikan Gateway Borough. It's been that $490,000 mark every year. When is that transferred over? Is that in their July budget or is it in our budget?
It is in their July through June budget year is when they make the payment to us, and it would be during our calendar year.
Okay. Well, given the present situations as we go through this budget, I guess Plan B would be what happened if that didn't materialize, I guess. So those have been ongoing conversations, and I just want to keep them in mind. Brings us on to M2. Again, summary by personnel. Is there any questions in regards to the library? And as you see there, the library has 11.81 employees, and I found it interesting that they're ahead of, they have more employees than 13 other of the general government departments and only topped by police, fire, finance, engineering, and streets. So they have a lot of different divisions in the library. You got the director, of course, and you have the adult tech staff, assistants, different things, but they run numerous different programs. As we go through this, we'll see a lot of division. Any questions on M2? M3? Yes.
Just more of a comment. This may not be a popular thing to say, but I think while we're looking at slashing from the fire and the police and everything else, and looking at this library, and as you say, how many different programs and employees that I think are all great. I think this is a place that we're going to have to take a look at as well. I mean, if we're talking about cutting police officers and things, I think it would be prudent to take a hard look at this library budget as well.
Thank you, Riley. Anybody else? Moving on to M4, the continuation of its accomplishments. M5, of course, this is the Adult Technical Service Division, 1410230. It talks about the expenditures by category, the funding sources, and full-time equivalents. And so I guess this would be called your base library services, and then everything expands from there. The majority of the cost comes from either property taxes charges to the KGB. And Carl, if I remember right, was there a position open in the library at this time?
I don't believe so, Mr. Mayor. The position that we targeted for abolition was an occupied position.
Thank you. Did somebody say something? All right. Brings us on to M6. These are the operating changes for 2021 in the adult tech division. We show a decrease of $12,000 or 23.5%, which are the impacts on the general fund operating from the COVID pandemic. And so they reallocated to audio and digital books and some other usage in the digital library stuff. Brings us down to division operating budgets. It shows you by personnel and services and benefits. Go to supplies and contract purchase services. On page M7, we look at the minor capital and the interdepartmental charges. Total expenses by type, it shows that we are down 2.5%. Then we break into the narratives on M7. They continue on M8 and M9. M10 is the outreach service division, 1410 231. We have the mission statement. So again, I don't know how much of these programs are supported by the state, and if we're looking at any reduction from the state, that's yet to be materialized. Do we have anybody to speak to what they are following in the state and seeing if those funds would be going to come available?
I don't believe that the services, the outreach services that we're currently providing, that there's any state money that is helping to support that. We
Okay.
do, the state library does provide a general kind of operating grant of $7,000 a year that we get, and usually that goes to library materials, but it could be allocated for other things as well.
Thank you.
Your Honor.
Yes, go right ahead.
Question for Pat. Pat, have you seen, can you tell me the increase in what you guys have been doing since the COVID pandemic? Sorry.
That's okay. Well, we've been doing in outreach. We have been doing, or Rebecca has been doing a lot of work with both homebound patrons, so people who can't get out for whatever reason, and also has been doing a variety of things to reach out to people who aren't necessarily going as far as they normally would. They're limiting their movements. So they're doing a lot of book shares, which are little shelves of books where you can take a book and leave a book. And friends' donations of materials have done a lot for that. And also, we're doing a lot of online, since we can't do in-person programming, a lot of online programming. Also, we started working with KRBD. We started the KRBD Tuesday night program on the radio. And so we're just kind of trying to figure out how we can best partner with a variety of community organizations to continue to provide some kind of services during the pandemic. So
did that program with KRBD, is that a voluntary thing by KRBD? And we have paid staff that does that, or how does that work?
Oh, yes. So staff volunteer to read a story, a classic story that they are fond of. And so usually it's a half an hour show, so it usually takes about half an hour to record the story, and then we just send it in to CaraBD. I think they're finally letting people actually record in studio, so we've got that option as well.
Well, we do remember the story, lady, and that was a good program. and all that. Anything on M10? Move this to M11. Anything on M11 in regards to expenditures by categories, funding sources, and full-time equivalents for the outreach service program? So it looks like, Pat, it looks like under the funding sources, the charge for services from KGB, there's a slight increase. Is that through the was that through the school district maybe?
I don't think so, not in outreach. I think that's probably our reciprocal agreement with the borough. What we do is we track how many borough residents use the library and how many city residents use the library. And the charge to the borough, or the amount the borough pays, is closely aligned with the percentage of borough residents who use the library, who have accounts, library accounts. So it generally works out to be about 40% borough residents and 60% city residents.
Thank you, Pat.
Mhm.
Any questions on M11? Brings us to M12. Talks a little bit about the changes and that there wasn't any significant changes between 2020 and 21 in this particular account. And again, that relates to the 5% or $5,000. This is operating expenditures under the division. Details, talks about supplies, contract purchase services, and interdepartmental charges. Are there any questions for M12? Hearing and seeing one brings us to M13, which is the narratives for that section. Moves us over into M14, which is Children's Service Division. Has a breakdown of the employees that man that service. Shows the goals for 2021. Again, M15 is a continuation with accomplishments for 2020. Carries over to the next page. M16 is the summary, division summary, expenditures by category, funding sources, and full-time personal equivalent in that particular operation. And it shows they're using about 3.5 employees there to man. Any questions on M16? And again, it shows that the charges for service for KGB shows a slight uptick, 2.6% in that cost center. Moves us on to page M17, which is the Children's Service Division. We talk about the division operating budget details, again, personal benefits, services, supplies, contract purchase services, minor capital outlays, furniture and fixtures, that type of stuff, and then environmental charges. Is there any questions for M18? On M18, we move into the narratives for the Children's Service Division. M19 is a continuation of Children's Service Division. M20, we move into the first City Library Division. Goes on to talk about the mission statement of that group, the goals and the accomplishments. We look at the division summary, department expenditures, funding sources, We go to page M2, shows the expenditures by type. Talks about the operating budget changes, there were no significant changes in this department. A lot of this is contract purchase services, it looks like. We get down to the division operating budget details. We look at operating supplies.
Your Honor.
Yes, go right ahead.
65001 telecommunications, why the 33% jump on that?
So the library has for many years, and this includes First City Library, we have applied for a federal program for E-rate discounts, and that basically gives us discounts on our internet access and used to be telephone service as well. And for a very long time, that discount was 70% a year, which was great. The federal government bases the discount for each community on the number of children who qualify for the National School Lunch Program. So for some reason in 2019, our percentage of children who qualified went from, I think, 35% to 32%. And that bumped us from the 70% discount to a 60% discount. So since we're getting 10% less in a discount this year, we had to increase the telecommunications line in First City Libraries, and then later on you'll see there's a similar increase for the library.
Thank you.
So are you saying that the 10% in the school lunch program equates to 33% reduction in the telecommunications grant or subsidy?
Oh, so it's basically, I think the reduction in the number of students who qualify is just a 3% reduction, but that put us under, that bumped us up into the next lower category of discounts. So instead of getting the 70% discount, which we were to get, it bumped down to a 60% discount. And so when we were calculating how much we would have to spend on telecommunications this year, when we looked at that 10% difference, it actually added up to more than a 10% difference in the budget.
So Pat, how do you use that telecommunications service?
Let's see. So we have our internet service that the staff uses to do our work and to provide services, but we also have the public computers, the public internet computers. We have our wireless access that we provide to the public. And so it's I'm thinking 2 or 3 different systems. And then with this First City Libraries, in this First City Libraries division, that is the money that we use to provide internet access to our shared catalog. First City Libraries is shared between the public library, the UIS Ketchikan campus library, and the school district library. So we all share one system, and that one system lives at KPU, and we pay for that internet access to the system, to and from the system.
So do we pay an equal share with the partners that we're working with?
The each of our shares is dependent on the number of records that we have in the system. So I believe that UIS has the fewest number of records, so they have the smallest library. The group of school libraries has, I think, about 27 or 28%, and I think the public library pays about 46 or 47%, just because we have a large number of distinctive titles in the library.
So are we shifting these back and forth telephonically, or is it research information, or what exactly is it?
Oh, it's all kinds of things. This system is the system where we provide the catalog that the public can use, We provide all of the information that we use to provide services to patrons. And it actually is our ordering system as well. When we order new materials, it all gets fed through this system.
I guess if we're providing these to two other partners, there should be a greater participation because if we all benefit from it, when we consider equitably, I think that that matrix should be more. Because it's a matter of having that access. It's not how much stuff you have.
Right. Well, we can certainly talk. We have a contract with First City Libraries. We can certainly review that contract and see what changes we might make in it.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So M21. M22 are the narratives for that, for the First City Library Division. M23 is UAS Library Division. So, and this doesn't matter, I guess it says by their geographical location. So we have the mission statement, the goals, and the accomplishments. M23, are there any questions there? M24 shows the division summaries. Yes. Did somebody want to add something? Okay, so moves us on to the expenditure categories, funding sources. So this is a funding source that is charged directly to the University of Alaska system.
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you. So it goes on to operating budget changes for 2021. Again, it says no significant changes between 20 and 21. And, you know, this is a place where that particular statement struck me, and it's in a lot of the division departments that we have. And I don't know how the 5% of $5,000 works into it, but given the budget situation that we're in, I think there's going to be significant changes. So I don't know how that particular statement is going to continue to work out. But I found that it just kind of struck me along. M25 goes on to the division operating budget details for the UAS Library Division. And again, Pat, we're relying on the state of Alaska to come through with the funding for that program, correct?
I think ultimately via the university. Yes, our agreement is with the Ketchikan campus, the university campus here. But ultimately, of course, that would come from the state.
So do we have a renewable contract over a term, or is it just a year-by-year basis in regards to how we operate the system?
It's a year-by-year contract. Usually it gets reviewed and approved in, I think, April or May.
So if these monies didn't come through, you'd have to adjust your operations accordingly, correct?
Right, absolutely, absolutely.
Mr. Mayor, if I could,
Yes.
we get reimbursed 100% from this program. So if the state opted not to fund the university library, this program would cease. It would be neutral. We wouldn't make the expenditures. We wouldn't be getting the revenue in.
Thank you, Carl.
It would go away.
Thank you. M25 is the narratives for that section. M26, we get to the public library operation and maintenance. We have the expenditures by category, the capital purchase, minor capital, and interdepartmental charges. We have the funding sources. Some of the budget changes, there was an increase in 8,000 or 33% due to change in federal telecommunications. E-rate discount, and that's what Pat had talked about a little bit earlier, and how that might have affected us. Any questions in regard to M26? Moves us on to M27. And on this one, this is one I think that a little bit of interest, and Pat, you may answer this in regards to, we know there was a diesel surcharge last year and you're heating strictly by an electric boiler. And you made a minor change, about $2,800, which is 4.6%. And is that truly, I guess, reflective of what the diesel surcharge was?
I think, yes, yes, last year, it really did bump our charge for electric way up there. So it looks like I think our estimate was 60,000 for this year. Looks like we're not going to actually spend as much as 60,000. So that's an allocation that we could definitely look at reducing somewhat.
Why? I think my mic's working fine right now, so. Oh, I keep clicking off, they say. At this particular point, if we could take about a 10-minute recess, I think IT is here to look at my machine. If that's okay with everybody at this particular point, take a short break. Thank you. So we are on M27. Is there any questions on M27? Hearing none, that moves us on to M28, which is more of the narrative sections. We're in the library. We move on to M29, which is the grants programs. On M29, it gives you the mission statement, the goals and accomplishments. Under division operating details, it shows the supplies and contract purchase services on that page. No questions, moves us on to M30. Grant program. Yes. Did somebody have something? All right. Continues on with the grant programs and the operating budget changes in that grant program. And then goes into the narratives, which is library books. And then on M31, it shows the major capital projects, which are building and infrastructures and plant. Was there any? Yes, go ahead.
I just had a couple questions. Pat, under the medium risk and high risk level for COVID, are you guys open to the public? Is it all online services? Could you tell me, I guess, how many months or days out of the year have we been open?
Oh my gosh, I'm sure I could get you that figure. This has been an extraordinary year. At high risk level, we've been closed to the public, but we have been doing curbside service, which has been very popular this fall. We have a lot of homeschooling families who need materials to work with their children. So we've been having a lot of homeschooling families doing curbside service. We generally pick up between like 75 and 100 holds a day through curbside, and then have them available for people to pick up at the front door. Now with a move to a moderate risk level, we will open to the public There will be limitations. The meeting rooms will not yet be available. We'll have seating for individuals, but not seating for groups. And we'll be, recommending that people wear masks and social distance and do all that stuff. And we certainly all are masking and keeping social distance. So there are some limitations, but at a moderate risk level, we will be open to the public.
Okay, so for the most part, this year you guys were relatively open to the public for public access. Okay.
Yes, right. I think we reopened May 26th to the public, and then we were open until November 5th. I think we shut down again to the public.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Thank you, Pat.
Mhm.
Moves us on into the museum. On page N1, we have the summaries for the museum. Shows the cost centers, expenditures by categories, and funding sources. And there's a full match of general fund support, charges for service, public works sales tax, grants, and community facility development fund. Any questions on N1? Brings us to N2, which shows in the operations the full-time equivalent employees of 8.2 there. N3 goes into the museum mission statements, shows a matrix of their employees and where they're at. Goals for 2021. N4 continues on in accomplishments in regard to exhibits, program attendance, collections, facilities, and other projects. We move on to N5, which is operating division, 142110. Shows expenditures by category. We go down to funding sources. As you can see, under the general fund support, they're looking for about a 16.3% increase, or $104,000 relative to funding sources for this. Any questions for N5? Moves us into N6, operating budget changes, division operating budget details. We look at personnel services, supplies, grant purchase. We look at minor capital outlays and interdepartmental charges. N7 gets into the narratives. Are there any questions in regards to those? Moves us into N8, which is more of the narratives, as well as N9, more of the narratives. Moves us into N10, which museum building O&M costs there. We have the supplies group. We have the electric, water, and sewer and solid waste under the contract purchase services, minor increase. Again, I'm concerned about how we manage the diesel surcharge and if there's any reductions in regard to that. Funding sources, this is general fund support. We go to N11, which shows the operating budget changes. They're showing the heating fuel to decrease by about 9,000 or 21% to reflect the actual expense in recent years. Any questions with N11? N12, we're on the cost center for the operation budget. We show operating expenditures and the funding sources associated with those. Then we drop into the narrative for that particular category, the Historic Commission. N13 is the grants program. Shows the cost summaries or details there. Any questions in regards to the grants? Brings us to N14, the continuation of the grant programs. What we're looking at there. Has some narratives in regards to those. And 15 brings us to major capital outlays and capital improvement projects. Under those projects, there's a couple that we'll be able to talk about under the CIP program. Is there any questions in regards to N15? Hearing and seeing none, moves us out of the museum into the Civic Center.
Your Honor, I had a question or.
Yes, go right ahead.
And I totally don't know if this is legal or not, but has our museum department looked into offering ship tours, especially in the bubble realm? Because it's an area that can be controlled and so forth. I just didn't know, one, if a city entity could do that, or two, I just think you would be guaranteed more revenue when the ships returned to the city facility if something like that was set up. So I was just wondering.
Anita, have you considered that?
We do. We have an agreement with all of the Holland America and Princess ships. So we have been working with them for the last several years to do a cultural tour. So that includes the Totem Heritage Center. And they come and they're here for about 50 minutes or so, and then they head on and are part of, I think, 3 other visits that they go through. We have not had a lot of success in having cruise ship tours here at the museum. Just some different logistics as far as getting the bus stopped in front of the museum, in the parking lot, or at the bus stop. Just sort of different as far as being able to move through logistically. So yeah, we'll continue to work with Holland America Princess, and we've certainly worked with other tour groups in the past. So we very much would like to be part of the bubble and working towards that.
Anita, I would definitely encourage you to move forward on that. The logistical challenges that you mentioned aren't, I mean, buses can't pull up to my current facility that I am employed at, but we make it work, and it's still kind of in that now, I guess, the bubble realm. So I would highly recommend that, especially going into a reduced season that you aren't going to be seeing the 65,000. The more people we can drive in there off of the ship will help offset your costs and improvements later on.
Absolutely.
Thank you for that, Abby. Thanks, Anita. So we moved out of the museum, and now we are in the Civic Center. It shows a summary in the Civic Center, shows the division cost centers, expenditures by category, and funding sources. So if you go through that, are there any questions in regards to 01?
Your Honor, I had a few.
Yes.
So earlier in one of the budget updates, I think it was number 5, we talked about the fund that offsets these costs for the Civic Center. This year, are we pretty much paying for 2020 out of tax dollars or general fund? And will that be the case with 2021 just because we can't hold regular events in terms of COVID and so forth. And then the second part of that, is it really worth the city keeping control of the Civic Center? Is it worth looking into potentially selling the building?
Thank you. Alice, do you want to address that?
Well, in terms of the funding source, I believe it's the transient sales tax. So that is, I think specifically when you go to a hotel and they have a bed tax, that's where the funding is coming for the Civic Center this year and last year. So it's a little bit separate from the general fund, and I believe it's because it was for economic impact, because community events do, of course, potentially still have the impact, even if we don't see the direct charge for services happening. And although we have been impacted by COVID, we still have been making sure that the facility is available for a variety of public meetings and trainings and other city department events along those lines.
Thank you, Alice. And I like to thank you as you look here and you look at the operations, and you have a 44% reduction in that, and it's equated on down through the process. And it looks like you've just pretty much zeroed out your capital outlay and tried to push those projects off to something more in the future. And I certainly appreciate your attempt to balance your budget out in that manner. Also, it shows that you've had a reduction in some of your funding sources. So thank you for that. Anything on 01? If not, we'll move to 02. Mission statements, goals, and accomplishments. We move on to 03.
Your Honor, can I ask
Yeah.
Alice a question? Hey, this is
Yeah.
Jan. Hey, Alice, what's the plan going into this next year? Are you guys have anything scheduled for training?
That's the amazing thing. Even through 2020, we have always had things scheduled. What happens is we work with the EOC to see if the event can move forward in the way that these groups need it to. And that's where we've had cancellations most of the time. The cancellations have not occurred until about 6 weeks in advance. So we've put in the time to try and see if there's any way that we can make them happen. So for 2021, we still have the majority of the annual events that we're used to seeing booked. And even things like the Board of Fisheries, we're looking at potentially having them for 2 weeks in April, but that's only if, as we're working with the EOC, they're able to find the way to make these meetings happen safely. But they have not canceled. They still want to come if there's any way they possibly can.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alton. Unfortunately, like as we see on 03, as our funding sources is the charges for services decrease, we turn around and have to rely more on taxes for to cover the costs of keeping the place open and operational. And I see that in a lot of the different, I guess, facilities or programs that aren't self-sustaining in their funds. Is there any questions on 03? Seeing none, bring us to 04, operating budget changes. She showed some decreases in their heating fuel costs to match what's actually happened. Their travel business account has been decreased by 100%. Travel and training the same, and training and education account was decreased, zeroed out by 100%. So we go into the operating expenditures, personnel services, supplies, contract purchase, minor capital outlays, and interdepartmental charges. On page 05, we start the narrative session for those. 06 is more than narrative, 07 continuation with narratives. If there's any question on those, please let me know. We move into 08, some more of the narratives in regards to the cost centers in operation. 09 shows the major capital outlays. There's some stuff in the buildings, machinery and equipment and infrastructure, and those have all pretty much been zeroed out to the tune of 386,165 or 100%. Any questions in 09 or on 09? Moving on, that takes us out of the Civic Center, moves into tourism and economic development. On page P1, this is the tourism and economic development is combined of one division, one program, and one capital improvement program. So, and these are funded majority by the commercial vessel passenger excise tax. So we go into the executive summary. It shows the cost summary there. Expenditures by category. And then the funding sources. They're CPV related. P2 talks about the operations division. This is in order to promote tourism and economic development. We look at contract purchase services. That's down by 11.8% or $20,000 from 172 estimated or 450 to 152 143. And this is the economic and department parking development fund. They show that they decrease that again with some of the assumptions in regards to Ward Cove and the Ketchikan Visitor Bureau annual budget. We look at, is there any questions on P2?
Your Honor.
Yes, go ahead.
No questions specifically, but I want to speak to the application, and this will actually carry over into grants in general, things that are funded with public money. So I'm looking at their application, and I was on the grants committee last year, and this one actually kind of surprised me. It was my first year on the grants committee. So the city funds various grants, and there doesn't seem to be any requirement that the grant applications disclose salary by position. Some of these organizations just lump it all together, payroll. So we're sitting here having a discussion of our fiduciary responsibility of public funds. We're talking about consideration of asking municipal employees to take a pay cut of X possibly. And this city doesn't require the same bar on grant applications. I don't think it's equitable, and I think it needs to change. And I think this is the year to do it.
Thank you, Mark. So in regards to that, are there any other council members that wish to speak to that? And we can make a recommendation if we wish through this budget process that they come back with a report, I guess, to us in regards to wages and salaries.
Your Honor?
Your Honor,
Yes, go ahead.
which one?
Whoever's first. Go ahead, Judy.
So Mark, if I just want to be sure that I understand, right now, everybody's salary is lumped in one line, and you would just like to see it broken down by position?
Correct. Line number 5,000, payroll expenses, total wages and benefits, a figure of X. For what was it? Five full-time employees, 3 seasonal. I may have that number wrong. It's back. It's a ways back in there. And I noticed that this same methodology was applied
For all the
And
grants.
the grants last year as well. I sent this all to the council later this afternoon for consideration. And my rationales were the following. This is public money. It's no less public than anything else that we spend public money on. Every salary of every person attending these meetings is disclosed publicly. I don't think the bar should be different. We are faced with a budget this year where we're talking about canceling $500 items in order to save some money, maybe not buy a cop car if it's the right thing to do. And I think it speaks to transparency. We had a lot of discussion recently about transparency regarding the RFP. And I think if we're going to have discussions about transparency, I think they need to be balanced, equitable, and consistent.
Right.
I just wanted to thank Mark for that explanation, and I can see where you're coming from. I don't necessarily disagree, but I would just want to know, does anybody else see any kind of repercussion of folks providing that? I mean, the city does. All of our salaries are disclosed, or it's all public information. If people are funded with public money, should they not have to disclose that, how they spend it? That's all I have. Thank you.
Your Honor?
I think Gas wants to speak, Bob. Is your mic working?
Yeah, is it working?
Yeah, I'd like to, can you hear me?
Yeah.
I can hear you, Riley.
Okay, yeah, well, I was just gonna chime in too. I think Mark has a very valid point. Yeah, pretty much agree with everything he said. It's public money. The public ought to see what it's being spent on and how much. So, I agree with, both council members, Inge and Flora.
Your Honor?
Yes.
Oh, yeah, as a person who for 13 years receives part of my salary from the city via Historic Ketchikan, I don't think it's a problem at all, with disclosing where the money's going more truthfully. I don't have a problem with that at all.
So if we want to move that forward and ask the manager to request that information from those that we are applying this funding to, I guess, do I hear any opposition to doing that?
I agree. I don't see any problem with that.
All right, hearing no opposition. Carl, is that enough direction for you to request that information?
It is for the KVB, Mr. Mayor, and I assume it's direction to the clerk relative to the grant applications that will go out early next year to all the different agencies that you'll want that information disclosed as well.
Correct. Correct.
We'll
Thank
take
you.
care of it.
All right, so yes, go ahead.
We did add that request into this year's grant application that went out, but we may get a lump sum like KVB did. So we'll make sure that we get back with them and say we'd like a breakdown.
Thank you, Kim. So we, I think, are on P2 with the Operation Division of the Tourism and Economic Development. Moving to P3. Operating Division has contract purchase services. So it says here that 49% of the 142,143 of the Ketchikan Visitors Bureau annual contract is paid by the Economic and Parking Development Fund, and 51% is paid by the Port Enterprise Fund. And given the situation with the Port Enterprise Fund, is there any concerns in regards to making that, or Carl, that you can see?
Mr. Mayor, like everybody else, I'm not in a position to predict what next year's season is going to look like. We followed council's direction from July and are basing our assumptions on a 50% capacity after accounting for Ward Cove, compared to 2019. Personally, I think it's probably going to be less than that. I hope I'm wrong. I think the whole Canadian issue is very much up in the air as we speak tonight. It's really, the council's going to have to determine what you think is your best estimate, and then we'll go from there. If we have no season, then yeah, it's a whole different ballgame. But I don't think anybody's in a position to make that prediction today.
So I would like to defer this conversation. I don't think Patty's on. I think she's out of town. That's a particular point. And so if we're going to have a discussion further about the Visitors Bureau and the marketing, I would just soon have her here for that discussion.
Your Honor,
Yes.
I had a memo from her, an email from her, and she'll be back December 2nd. So maybe we could invite her to our Monday, December 7th budget meeting.
I think that's appropriate. Thank you. So we'll ask for her attendance to that, and we'll take up some of this tourism and marketing questions at that particular time, because I guess it's relative to what's happening with COVID and the lack of the cruises and the uncertainty, how much we're going to actually be working on this marketing for this year.
Your Honor,
Yes.
is it also possible for her to bring back a budget based on a 50% capacity? At the beginning, it states that she did it on a full 100% return to cruising. And I and anybody in the industry and sitting at this table know that's unrealistic. So if we could get something maybe at 50% capacity, what their costs are going to be, I would really like to see that before asking any more questions.
So Carl, could you request that of her at some point?
I will make the request, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. We're on P4, I believe. The Ambassadors Program, as you can see, that's been pretty much looks like zeroed out at this particular point. Uncertainty about how we're going to manage the season next year, if we're going to have a season. I think that's pretty appropriate.
Your
Any
Honor.
questions? Yes.
Yeah, I have a couple questions on that. I think just looking at what we have here, like Abby said, I think we need to consider a reduction of 50%, but also how we're going to include other businesses and not just the select few for within that bubble that they keep talking about. I've heard from quite a few people that are worried that they're going to get left out of the loop or not be included in that based on the information with the idea that if they're not selling their tours on the ship, they're not going to be included. So if anything.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that point, Jan Lee. But as we all understand right now, we're at the whim of the cruise industry because it's their cruise and they're going to be able to manage that. I think that what we're doing in Ketchikan, and hopefully we're a little bit ahead of the curve, is that we're trying to find out exactly what that looks like for our community and how we can break that down and make a proposal to the cruise industry about how we can see the bubble working in Ketchikan and if we can expand that. So we have, I believe there are committees working on that right now. You know, they know they got a short time to move this thing forward. And matter of fact, I think there's a couple of different organizations doing the same thing. So hopefully we will get that information back. I know there's been an ask for a public forum, and I'm sure that they'll be bringing that to the city of Ketchikan to, if we are in a lower level where we have the capacity at the Ted Ferry, that we may house some kind of a forum at some point. So that's where we're at with that I know. So P5, the ambassador program. P6, CPV fund program. We looked at the division summary there. We have some contract purchase services and the funding sources, of course, through the special revenue fund, which is a little bit different than with the other ones that we use. And these are for, I think, some amenities and different things that are going on. It was increased this account because there's some things we're doing in regards to with the solid waste department downtown in the core of the tourism season. This was previously a program that was managed by the street department, but since it's really solid waste collection and pickup, I think the cost center has been moved to show that. So if the season doesn't happen and there's a bubble, I don't exactly know how we manage these funds or if it's continued on through, because the street grants are also a benefit to the general public on or off tour season. They still have to be collected. So moves us on to P7 under the Tourism and Economic Development capital budget. There's a list of projects there: the Promenade, Stedman Street restroom, visitors amenities, the Rock, Merryman's Trail, exit improvements, Salmon Walk, and these again, we'll all have a crack at these under the capital improvement list as we get there. Any questions into P6 or P7?
Your Honor.
Hearing none. Yes, go right ahead.
So are you saying before we really start scrutinizing these particular things, we're going to do that at a later time? Is that what you're saying?
What happens is we go through the operating budget, what we're doing now, and then we have the capital budget, which is behind this general government operating thing. And we'll go through those page by page for those projects that are slated for 2021.
Roger that. Thank you.
All right. Is there any other items for the Tourism and Economic Development? And again, we will be inviting back the Visitors Bureau to give us a little bit more in depth on some of the information that we requested. Moves us on to Q1, Public Works Engineering. Shows the summary there. Shows the division cost centers, expenditures by category, and funding sources. Is there any questions on what's happening with Q1? Q2. Carl, if I remember right, at this particular point, we have one building inspection position vacant, and that would be one of the ones that we consider not filling at this time.
That's correct, Mr. Mayor.
I want to make sure that everybody understands that at this particular point in time, we're just not making these positions going away. We're choosing due to budgetary constraints of holding them vacant. And I guess that's what my understanding is of this. Is it same understanding you have, Carl?
It is, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. If there's any other councils have any other thoughts about that?
Well, I have a question.
Yes, Abby.
So, to my understanding, even if we leave these positions vacant or lay off people or whatever we decide to do with these positions, that don't we still have to pay their benefits into the state fund?
So
That's
Abby,
correct.
that's an interesting question. I'll let Carl go ahead and answer that, but it's there's a PERS termination clause that we have to deal with. Is that correct, Carl?
We're not abolishing positions relative to the PERS termination liability, Mr. Mayor. These are layoffs due to budget constraints, and it's my understanding that as such, we're not dealing with that PERS issue. Relative to Councilmember Bradbury's question, Finance Director Bob Newell, when he put the budget together, did factor in the costs that we would have to pay the state relative to unemployment benefits. So those costs are included.
Thank you.
Do
Thank
we
you, Abby.
Do we have
Go
a
ahead.
figure of how much those benefits would cost us with getting rid of these potentially 10 positions?
I'll have to get you that analysis, Councilmember Bradbury, and I can do that. I just don't know the number off the top of my head, but I will get it for you.
Thank you.
Councilmember Bradbury?
Go ahead.
There was with the original layoff worksheet, there was an amount related to unemployment, if you're looking for just that amount.
Okay, I'll take a look. I don't remember seeing that, but thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. So that brings us to Q3, the mission statement. Shows the breakdown of the engineering division. Shows the goals for 2021. Page Q4 shows continuations of those goals and the accomplishments for 2020. Breaks down the division summaries on page Q4 and Q5. Q6, again in the operation division, shows some of the breakdowns in those matrix as we move forward. So Mark, and again, these are small numbers for sure, but in your overtime and wages, it doesn't show that you use a lot of those funds, and you have reduced them by 30% to 15, to I guess budgeted 35,000. And I think we only used 20,000 in 2020. I'd like to reduce that by another 5 to 20,000, and it still gives you almost 10, or what is it? A pretty good percentage to work with in regards to a need. Is that okay?
Well,
0101.
just right. So just keep in mind that we have a pretty big project that we're trying to tee up for next year in the Schoenbar Creek culvert. So that overtime is driven by the contractor's schedule. And when we have work like that, that's very sensitive to weather. And then when there's long days, of course, they tend to work late at night, weekends and that sort of thing. And it really drives our overtime budget. So I just want you to be aware that while we can control it as much as we can, by planning ahead and managing efficiently, when that contractor's out there and doing this work, we need to be there. And so I'm just not sure that a reduction by that amount would pan out. I'm certainly willing to give it a shot. But I would give you that caveat.
Well, that's why I asked. So I don't have any problem with that. You have a fairly good justification, and I know that's going to be a fairly large project and weather dependent, and yeah, I don't have any problem with that. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Anybody have anything? Yes. Somebody have something? Okay, moving on to Q6. Does anybody have anything else on Q6? Seeing none, moves us to Q7. Operation expenditures, the minor capital, interdepartmental charges, that kind of stuff. We go into the narratives.
Your Honor, of course, I have some questions here.
Go ahead.
15, 790, 26. I see that 29 or 790, 26 has been reduced, but it doesn't state what the money is going to be used for. Are we on a that IT lovely schedule that they don't want to veer from? If so, how many computers are you replacing? Are there any other needs within the department that aren't stated in here?
Yeah, so all good questions. Let me preface this with the engineering division, as you can imagine, is full of very technical people. Those type of technical people tend to use specialty software and need very high performing computers to run that software. Our computers typically run close to in the $3,000 to $4,000 range. So this budget could give us one computer that would be suitable to do our mapping and AutoCAD drafting and that sort of thing, and then leave room for one not so robust computer and maybe a couple monitors, something like that. Many times with the intensity of use of computers in the engineering department, we go in with the best of intentions of following IT's plan, and sometimes that works out, sometimes it doesn't. In this case, we thought either two very robust computers for technical type staff, or one and a lesser computer with some periphery equipment would be wise to budget for. So that's how we came up with the 8,000. And I would mention too, with 10 employees, if we did 2 computers, that puts us on a 5-year rotation, which really isn't, that's not where we want to be. We want to be more on a 3-year rotation, I think, as Curtis mentioned in an earlier budget meeting for the engineering division.
Thank you, Mark. Any other questions? Q7, Q8, Q9, those are the narratives for the department. Q10, we jump into the building inspection department. As their goals and accomplishments on Q10, Q11 gives you the division summary. Again, this is, we have a vacant position that we're slating not to fill at this time in that division. Q12. So again, Mark, this is one of those overtime questions. I see that you only use about 3,700. I know we're going to be down to one inspector. And the approved budget before was 15,000. Are you thinking that you're going to use considerable amount of overtime in that, depending on the projects that we have moving forward?
Mr. Mayor, I'm really not seeing next year develop a whole lot different than this year. So, I think we could give it a shot cutting that one.
I'll let you give me a number.
Say to 5,000. So cut it in half. I think we'd have a real shot at being able to achieve that.
Thank you, Mark.
You're welcome.
Anything else in Q12, Q13? You see anything there? Q14 are narratives. Shows how we go through these processes. Q15, KPU administration, building O&M. We have the cost center summary there. We have some of the funding sources. The operating budget changes for 21. Q16. I see, Mark, here you put in that we had a 27% reduction due to the diesel surcharge. Are you oil or electric in that building?
We're electric.
All right, yeah. And you're working on upgrading that to a more efficient type system, maybe?
We did some cost analysis on that and you know, to just kind of figure out what a return on investment would be. We're going to have to develop some firmer cost estimates. However, you know, to switch, we're looking at switching maybe to fuel oil because the electric boilers are really at the end of their useful life. I didn't want to do that and then have it take, say, 15 years to pay off. So we're still looking at it, but right now the payoff period was way too far out there. And mainly because we don't have to do hardly anything to swap out our electric boilers. It's all set up for that. They're really bulletproof. And so to switch to fuel oil boiler, we'd have to most likely put a small addition on the building, and then we're into all the trades. You know, we'll have plumbers, we'll have carpenters, we'll have electricians coming in. Whereas to swap out the electric boilers, it's pretty much just swap them out and go on with life. So while I would like to do something a little different, it's just not penciling out right now.
I like the way you think. Thank you for that explanation. Anything else on Q16? Q17. We have major capital outlays and then capital improvement projects.
Your Honor,
Yes.
this is Judy. I'm going to have to sign off. I have a Zoom meeting at 8:30. How much longer are you guys going to be going? Because I would like to be at least to be here for the ports and harbors. So if the intention is to go late tonight, if somebody could tell me. And
Well, actually, I was going to ask that right after this. We have the cemetery, which wouldn't take much time at all. And then I'll poll the council on to see how they're at. I think we're moving through at a fairly decent rate. I would assume we'd get out of general government and into their capitals at our next full budget meeting. And I don't know if there's anything we're going to do in regards to that at the regular meeting coming up. So that's where I'm at with it. So what do you guys think? How are you guys doing time wise and stamina wise and where we're at in the budget? Do I have any comments on that? How about you, Dave? What do you think?
I'm fine. I think you're right. I think basically we're going to get through Public Works and with that, we'll probably be done with this.
All right, Abby?
I'm here till it finishes.
All right, Jan Lee?
So we're gonna do through up into the harbors, or are we gonna stop after the streets?
I think that once we get, I think the ports and harbors will take some time, but I think the rest of this stuff should go fairly quick. And so I'm just seeing, we've been at this 2.5 hours. We got
So
another
in the-
meeting this week yet.
Yeah.
And so I'm thinking that maybe we stop at the 2.5 hours and then take this up on our next.
That works
regular
for me. Yeah.
Sounds good to me, Bob.
All right, sounds good.
Sam, did you say
right.
you want to go 2 more hours? Negative.
So
We
we're
have a
on Q,
council meeting on Thursday, so yeah, I think this is good.
so we're on Q7, Q17. Are there any questions on that? Hearing none, I think we're gonna get through the cemetery. I want to knock it out. There's not a lot in there, of course. And that's on R1 and it shows, this is a contract service managed, I think, through, both a little bit of cooperation between the Public Works and the clerk's office. So, you can see there the department's executive summaries. There's not much in that. R2 is the mission statement, goals, accomplishments, division summaries. Any questions in regards with that? R3 shows the operating budget changes. And we'll be able to talk a little bit under minor capital, I guess, later. I'd bring back what we're doing there with the demolition of the greenhouse. And then division operating budget details. R4 are the narratives. And R5 is the minor capital projects and the infrastructure plant projects. Any questions on the cemetery? Hearing and seeing none, I think that will bring us to our stopping point for this evening. And so I believe I need another motion in order to defer this until the December 3rd meeting. Do I have that motion?
Your Honor, I move the City Council defer consideration of resolution number 20-2796 to the regular City Council meeting of Thursday, December 3rd, 2020.
Do I have a second?
Second.
It has been moved and seconded. Any discussion? Hearing and seeing none. Madam Clerk, would you call the roll?
Flora,
Yes.
Gas,
Yes.
Kiefer,
Yes.
Gage,
Yes.
Bergeron,
Sam, are you there?
Did you call me?
yes.
Yeah.
Would Bergeron?
Yes.
Okay. Bradbury?
Yes.
Thank you.
So again, that brings us now down to mayor and council comments. Judy, I'll let you go first since you got to sign off.
I think she already signed off.
Let's see the way she is. Sam,
No comment.
Mark,
As the council looks through this budget, I would like them to please at least look at the potential of some transfers. I'm not opposed to the possibility of some wage reductions, as unpleasant as that is. Here's my biggest concern if we try to save the day, so to speak, with just that mechanism or with too much of that mechanism. One is if people decide to retire, if people decide to move on, we need to balance this budget and understand we have to preserve key services, and that in a time of contraction, if some of the talent we have decides to move on, we may find it hard to replace. And the other aspect for consideration is that whether a job is private sector or municipal, it does stimulate our economy. So anybody that we keep on the job, they're going to shop local, and that's good for all of us. That's all I got. Thank you, Your Honor.
thanks, Mark. Jan Lee.
I don't, just keep it short. I agree with Mark. I just want to see all our options, and I don't want to see people, if we can avoid losing jobs so we can keep our economy strong, that's what I want to see. And I think I just want to see everybody do their part. So that's all I got right now.
Thank you, Jan Lee. Abby.
Thank you for enduring all my questions, and a big shout out to KPU for everything they did for the holiday TV program.
Thank you. Riley?
Yeah, kind of said earlier, but I'm really encouraged to see everybody from all the departments stepping up and understanding that everybody's going to take a hit. I think it's really honorable of the police and fire chiefs to basically take that. So as I said, I'm kind of looking at a hybrid of our options here. In a perfect world, what I'm looking at or kind of thinking is leave the current vacancies open, don't fill those coming vacancies from the retirees, and then maybe look at a cut for everybody. So kind of a little bit of both options, but yeah, that's what I'm thinking. Thanks.
Thanks, Riley. Dave? I can't hear you. Still can't hear you.
Question, folks. I actually
There you
heard
are.
some. I keep hitting mute. Is it on? Am I on? It says I'm
You're on. Yep.
I just wanted to thank folks for some good questions tonight. I think we're seeing some good perspectives on some areas that maybe we hadn't thought about, and that's always a good thing. And yeah, it's going to be an interesting process. That's all I got.
Thank you, Dave. So Carl, we'll see an update on the 3rd. I know that's not too far away, or are we going to see it at the next budget meeting, you think?
Let me talk with my staff tomorrow and we'll get something together as quick as we can.
Thank you, Carl. I have nothing further, and I'm looking forward to seeing you guys on Thursday. This is my social gathering now.
That is sad.
So do I have do I have a motion?
To adjourn, Your Honor.
Second.
Thank you very much. We will stand adjourned at this time. Oh no, and recess. No,
Recess.
recess. Thank you.